Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, we are taking a deep dive into Anta Sports.
Yeah, one of the biggest sportswear companies in the world right now.
And it's really interesting because they've had this incredible rise, really kind of mirroring the economic transformation of China, over the past few decades.
Exactly.
And, a lot of people have heard of Nike and Adidas, but Anta's kind of flown under the radar for a long time for those not following the industry closely.
Right.
So we're going to try to unpack that.
Yeah.
Really give you the learner kind of that shortcut to understanding what they've done, how they've gotten to where they are.
Yeah, it's an amazing story, really. And we've had the opportunity to talk to some real experts in this space.
Yeah.
People who've been following Anta's journey for years,
Yeah.
and we're going to try to synthesize all that information, those key decisions, those strategies that help them go from, a small company to this global giant.
Yeah, so we're going to look at everything. Their origins, the founders' early steps, the backdrop of China's economic reforms. We'll talk about the really intense competition they faced in Xinjiang, this place they call the capital of shoes.
The capital of shoes.
It's amazing. And then we're going to look at how they kind of outmaneuvered their rivals, back in those early days in the 90s and the 2000s, and then how they tackled these, huge macroeconomic challenges that came along.
Right.
And ultimately how they became the #1 sportswear brand in China, overtaking some very established players.
Even international giants like Nike and Adidas.
Yeah, it's remarkable. And then finally, we're going to look at their more recent global mergers and acquisitions strategy and the success they've had, especially in the post-COVID world.
Yeah, they've been really aggressive, in acquiring some well-known brands.
Absolutely.
And it seems to be paying off for them.
Yeah, so we're going to dive into all of that. Hopefully we'll uncover some surprising facts along the way.
I think we will.
And really kind of give you a deeper understanding of how Anta has achieved what they have. So, to start, let's talk about the founder, Ding Shizhong.
Okay.
He was born back in 1970 in Fujian province. But to understand his story, we really need to start with his father, Ding Himu.
Right.
So back in 1979, and this is a really pivotal year in China. This is when China began its, period of economic reforms,
Right.
opening up to the world, embracing kind of more market-oriented policies.
Exactly.
And it's in this environment that Ding Himu decides to start a shoe factory in Xinjiang.
Yeah, incredible timing. This was a time when a lot of entrepreneurs were emerging in China,
Yeah.
taking advantage of those new opportunities.
Absolutely. And Xinjiang itself became this really, really important place in this story.
Oh, absolutely.
By the 1990s, it was producing something like 1/5 of all the sports shoes in the world.
It's mind-boggling when you think about it.
Yeah.
This one city, this capital of shoes, just churning out millions upon millions of shoes.
It's amazing. And a lot of local brands, started popping up around this time.
Right. Names like X-Step, Peak, Gurenio.
Yeah, names that, maybe outside of China people aren't as familiar with, but very big brands within China.
Yeah, and it was an incredibly competitive environment.
Oh, absolutely. So it was in this context that Ding Shizhong, was kind of coming of age. And in 1987, when he was around 17 years old, he leaves school to help his father run the shoe factory.
Wow. So at 17, he's already, getting that hands-on business experience.
Yeah.
And there's that story about him wanting to buy a motorcycle.
Ah, that's right.
Which at the time was a real symbol of, success, freedom for a young person.
Yeah. So he had that entrepreneurial spirit, he wanted to make his own way.
Absolutely.
And that same year, 1987, is really crucial. He takes 10,000 RMB and 600 pairs of shoes, from his father's factory.
Okay.
And he goes to Beijing, to the Wangkujing market.
This is a really famous market in Beijing.
Oh, yeah. Really bustling, lots of foot traffic.
Yeah.
And he basically sets up shop there.
And his strategy? What was he thinking?
Well, it was pretty straightforward. Offer good quality shoes, but at a really competitive price.
So kind of undercutting the competition.
Yeah.
Make it really appealing to those consumers walking by.
Exactly. And it worked.
Yeah.
The shoes sold really quickly.
Wow.
And this gave him really valuable insight into what customers wanted.
So he's learning directly from the market, what people are responding to.
Yeah, absolutely. And he wasn't content with just being a vendor in the market.
Right.
He goes back to Beijing.
Okay.
He rents a shop, transitions to being a proper store owner.
Okay.
And he notices something really interesting.
What's that?
The branded shoes are commanding much higher prices.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So even back then, branding was having a real impact.
Yeah, absolutely. So he has this light bulb moment.
Okay.
He says, we're making good quality shoes.
Right.
Why not create our own brand
Right.
and capture some of that value that the brands are getting?
Makes sense. And what did his father think?
His father agreed.
Okay.
So between 1987 and 1994, these early efforts, these entrepreneurial efforts in Beijing, he makes about 200,000 RMB.
Which is a significant amount at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that really sets the stage for what's to come. So in 1994, he's 24 years old at this point.
Okay.
He returns to Xinjiang.
Okay.
And he joins Anta Company, which had been founded 3 years earlier by his father-in-law.
Oh, okay. So it becomes a family affair.
Yeah, real family business. His father and siblings get involved as well.
So they're all in on this,
Yeah, absolutely. And by 1997, they've already expanded to 2,000 stores nationwide.
Wow, that's a rapid expansion.
Yeah.
So they're clearly doing something right.
Yeah. And what's interesting here is a lot of their competitors in Xinjiang, they were focused on these overseas OEM orders.
OEM meaning they were manufacturing for other brands, right? Basically, they were making the shoes but not putting their own brand on them.
Exactly. So they're kind of in the background, making shoes for these international companies.
Yeah, sort of like white label manufacturing.
Yeah, exactly. But Anta, they make a conscious decision to really focus on domestic sales.
Okay.
And building their own brand.
So they're thinking long term,
Yeah.
They want to control their own destiny.
Yeah, absolutely. And they pioneer this kind of specialized sports goods retail system in Wangfujing.
Okay, so they're moving beyond just manufacturing.
Yeah.
They're getting into the actual brand operation side of things.
Exactly. Although at this point, it's still largely a wholesale model.
Right.
So they're selling in bulk to other retailers.
Okay.
But their positioning is really interesting. They want to be a mass market brand.
So accessible to most Chinese consumers.
Right.
Not just focused on the high end.
Yeah, exactly. And they're a rising domestic player, but they're still facing this really stiff competition from the international giants.
Like Nike and Adidas.
Yeah. So Ding Shizhong, he realizes he needs to do something to really break through.
Yeah, they need to stand out somehow.
Yeah, and this is where it gets really interesting. He decides to invest heavily in a brand ambassador.
Okay. This is a common tactic in the sportswear industry.
Yeah. But he makes a really interesting choice.
Yeah.
In 1999, he decides to sign Kong Linghui.
Who is Kong Linghui?
He's a table tennis champion.
Okay, a big name in China for sure.
Huge.
Table tennis is massive there.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a smart move to tap into that national passion.
Absolutely. And it pays off big time because in 2000, at the Olympics, Kong Linghui wins a gold medal.
Wow.
And his endorsement for Anta, I choose, I like, it becomes this massive slogan.
And it puts Anta on the map, for a lot of people.
Yeah, they go from being this kind of mid-tier domestic brand to a real contender.
Yeah.
And they're quickly ranked among the top 3 to 5 Chinese brands.
It's amazing how much impact a single endorsement can have.
Yeah, but it was more than just the endorsement. It was tapping into that national pride.
Right.
The Olympics, Chinese athlete winning gold.
Yeah, that's powerful stuff.
Yeah, and it really resonated with consumers.
Absolutely.
So by 2005, they become the 4th largest sports brand in China with 3.2% market share.
Okay.
But you can still see the dominance of the international players.
Right.
Nike's at 13%, Adidas at 12.3%, and Li-Ning, the other big domestic player, is at 9.6%.
So Anta's made progress, but they still have a lot of ground to cover.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about this period of really rapid growth that follows.
Okay.
So around 2000, after the success with Kong Linghui, Ding Shizhong consolidates his control of the company.
Okay.
His father-in-law and father, they transfer their shares to him.
So he's fully in charge now.
Yeah. And from 2003 to 2009, this is a period of just explosive growth for Anta.
Okay.
Their revenue goes from 310 million RMB in 2004 to almost 6 billion in 2009.
That's incredible.
Yeah, an 18-fold increase. Their net profit jumps from just over 6 million to 1.25 billion.
That's even more dramatic.
Yeah, a 20-fold increase. And their store numbers, they ballooned from over 2,000 to around 6,600.
So they're expanding on all fronts.
Yeah, massively. And there are a few things happening here that are really fueling this growth.
Okay, like what?
So in 2001, China joins the WTO, the World Trade Organization.
Right.
This opens up a lot of new opportunities for Chinese businesses.
Yeah, access to new markets,
Yeah. And then in 2008, of course, you have the Beijing Olympics.
Right. A huge event for China.
Massive. And this just ignites this nationwide interest in sports.
And that translates into more people buying sportswear.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also this growing awareness in China of, health and fitness.
Right. People wanting to live a healthier lifestyle.
Yeah. So Anta and Li Ning, they emerge as the leading domestic players during this time.
They're really capitalizing on this perfect storm of opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. And in 2007, Anta goes public. They have their IPO in Hong Kong.
And how did that go?
It was a huge success. They raised 3.5 billion Hong Kong dollars.
Wow.
Which was the biggest IPO for a Chinese sports brand at that time.
So investors were clearly confident in Anta's future.
Yeah, absolutely. But Ding Shizhong, he makes a point of saying, even though we're a family-controlled business, we're committed to professional management.
Okay.
So they want to reassure investors that they're running the company in a professional and transparent way.
Right.
But going public, it brings increased scrutiny.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Investors want to see returns.
Yeah, and some concerns arise about Anta's brand strength.
Okay.
Compared to the international giants and even Li Ning.
Yeah, because Li Ning has that, founder's legacy as an Olympic athlete.
Right.
That gives them a certain credibility, in the performance sportswear market.
Yeah, and Ding Shizhong, he responds to these concerns in a really pragmatic way. He basically says, look, we're focused on value for money. We're not necessarily aiming to be the most expensive or the most exclusive brand.
They're going for a different segment of the market.
Yeah, they want to be accessible to a wider range of consumers.
Right.
And they want to build a reputation for quality at a good price.
So they're focused on building that trust, that loyalty with consumers.
Exactly. And to kind of further bolster their brand image, they make some strategic moves in sports marketing.
Okay.
In 2002, they become the first Chinese sportswear company to sign an NBA player.
Oh, wow.
Menki Betir.
Not a huge name, but still, it's a big deal for a Chinese brand to have an NBA player.
Oh, yeah. It's a signal of their ambition.
Yeah.
They're not just content with the Chinese market. They want to be seen as player on the global stage.
Makes sense.
And later they sign other NBA players, Steve Francis, Louis Scola.
Okay.
And they establish a long-term partnership with the CBA, the Chinese Basketball Association.
So they're really doubling down on basketball.
Yeah, they see the potential of basketball in China.
And they're smart to do that.
Yeah.
Basketball is hugely popular in China.
Yeah, absolutely. So between 2009 and 2014, Anta has to make some adjustments.
Okay.
The entire industry in China is dealing with this inventory glut.
Right. They'd all been expanding rapidly.
Yeah.
And then demand kind of slowed down.
Yeah. And Anta, they realize they need to shift their focus away from this wholesale model
Okay.
towards a more retail-oriented approach.
So they want more control over how their products are sold.
Exactly. And Ding Shizhong and his team, they go all in on market research.
Really?
They visit over 500 cities.
Wow.
They go to 70% of their stores.
That's a massive undertaking.
Yeah, they want to really understand what's happening on the ground.
And what do they learn?
A few key things. First, product quality is paramount.
Makes sense.
Second, the long-term outlook for the industry in China is still positive.
Okay.
And third, the wholesale model is just not working for them anymore.
Right. It's too risky.
Yeah. So they decide to move to this retail-oriented model, which means they need to manage their inventory much more closely.
Right.
They need to understand consumer demand at a much deeper level.
So it's a big shift in their operations.
Yeah, and it requires them to really change the skills and capabilities of their team.
So it's not just about changing the business model, it's about changing the people too.
Yeah, they need to move from this B2B mindset, this business-to-business mindset.
Where they're focused on managing relationships with distributors.
Yeah, to a more DTC approach.
DTC, direct to consumer.
Yeah, where they're really focused on understanding and serving the end customer.
That's a big shift in thinking.
Yeah, it's a big shift. And they actually benchmark themselves against Bell International.
Which is known for its retail and inventory management expertise.
Yeah, they're like, okay, Bell's doing this really well.
Yeah.
How can we learn from them?
Smart.
Yeah. And this proactive approach to dealing with the inventory issue, it really pays off for Anta.
Okay.
They emerge from this downturn much earlier than some of their competitors.
Like Li Ning, for example.
Yeah. And this really highlights the impact of strategic leadership.
Right, being willing to make those tough decisions,
Yeah. And this is also when they start to acquire other brands.
Okay.
So in 2009, they buy Fila from Bell International.
Really?
Yeah, for about 400 million RMB.
Interesting. So they're diversifying their portfolio,
Yeah, and Fila, it allows them to tap into this fashion sports category.
which is a growing market.
Yeah, absolutely. And Fila is operated under a different model.
How so?
It's primarily direct retail,
Okay.
which helps them manage those inventory risks that are still associated with the Anta brand.
Right, because they still have that big distributor network for the Anta brand.
Yeah, and Fila is managed by a separate professional team.
Okay, so they're giving them autonomy.
Yeah, and this really shows Ding Shizhong's vision in building this multi-brand portfolio.
Right. He's not afraid to let other people run these brands.
Yeah.
He trusts them to make the right decisions.
Yeah, and this ability to acquire and then successfully operate these distinct brands, it's a rare skill in the industry.
Yeah, not a lot of companies can do that well.
So between 2015 and 2022, Fila just experiences explosive growth.
Really?
Yeah, its market share in China increases significantly.
And what do you attribute that to?
Well, partly it's the groundwork that they laid in those earlier years,
Right.
but it's also this broader trend of consumer upgrading in China.
Right. People have more money to spend.
Yeah, and they're more willing to spend on premium brands.
And Fila is seen as a premium brand.
Yeah, absolutely. So by having Fila in their portfolio, Anta is really well positioned for this growth.
Yeah, it's like they anticipated this shift in the market.
Yeah. And during this time, they continue to grow their core Anta brand as well.
Okay.
They keep making strategic acquisitions and collaborations.
So they're not just relying on Fila for growth.
No, they're building this diverse portfolio of brands,
Okay.
and they're really transitioning into this multi-brand management company.
Which is different from Nike and Adidas.
Yeah.
They're mostly focused on their single brand.
Yeah,
So Anta is taking a different approach.
yeah, and it's working for them.
So what are some of the key strengths that have allowed Anta to do this?
Well, they have this extensive store network in China.
Right.
They have deep operational expertise, especially in the Chinese market.
Yeah, that's really valuable.
And they're really good at leveraging the entrepreneurial spirit of the Fujian region.
Okay.
So they're able to manage this franchise-based model for their core brand.
Right.
And this direct-to-retail model for their acquired brands like Fila.
So they can kind of adapt their approach to different brands.
Yeah, they're very flexible.
Yeah.
And their multi-brand strategy is really smart.
How so?
Well, they're targeting different segments of the market.
Okay.
So the Anta brand, that's for the mass market, value-oriented products.
Right.
Fila, that's fashion sports. And then their later acquisitions, like Arc'teryx and Salomon, those are for the high-end, outdoor, and specialized sports markets.
So they're not really competing directly with Nike in their core market.
Yeah, they're finding their own niches.
Yeah.
So around 2016 to 2019, they make some really big international acquisitions.
Okay. Like what?
They acquired Ascent, which is a Japanese brand known for its ski wear.
Okay.
And then in 2019, they acquire Amer Sports for 4.6 billion euros.
That's a huge acquisition.
Yeah, and Amer Sports owns some really well-known brands.
Like what?
Arc'teryx, Salomon, Wilson.
Those are all premium brands.
Yeah, so this shows their ambition to become a global player in the higher-end segments of the market.
Right.
And then, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic hits.
Right.
But during this time, they continue to push their DTC model, their direct-to-consumer model.
Okay.
They actually acquire 11 of their major distributors.
Really?
Yeah, which gives them control over about 3,500 stores.
Wow. So they're really consolidating their retail operations.
Yeah, they want more control over the customer experience.
Makes sense.
But it also comes with increased responsibility.
Right. They're now directly responsible for the performance of those stores.
Yeah, it's a big gamble.
Yeah.
But then in 2022, there's a big leadership transition at Anta.
Oh.
Ding Shizhong steps down as CEO.
Wow. After all these years.
Yeah. And they implement a co-CEO system.
Okay.
Lei Shixian, his brother-in-law, and Wu Yonghua, they become the co-CEOs.
So it's still a family affair?
Yeah, but they also bring in Xu Yang, who had been running Arc'teryx China, to be the CEO of the Anta brand.
Interesting. So they're bringing in someone with experience in the high-end market.
Yeah. And Ding Shizhong's son, he takes over Ascent.
Okay.
And his nephew, he takes over Kolon.
Wow. So they're really setting up the next generation of leadership.
Yeah. And throughout all of this, Anta has maintained a really strong track record of shareholder-friendly practices.
Okay. Like what?
They've consistently paid dividends.
Right.
They've done share buybacks.
So they're rewarding their investors.
Yeah, absolutely. And looking ahead, they're exploring new avenues for growth.
Like what?
Well, one interesting initiative is their Super Anta store format.
What's that?
These are larger stores.
Okay.
They're positioned as a more premium offering.
So they're going a bit more upmarket.
Yeah, they want to compete with brands like Lining and 361 Degrees.
Interesting. So they're not content with just being the value brand anymore?
Yeah, they want to elevate their brand image.
Makes sense.
And they're strategically replacing some of their smaller stores with these larger formats.
So it's a gradual evolution.
Yeah.
So what are some of the key takeaways from Anta's story?
Well, I think it really highlights the importance of adapting to changing market dynamics.
Right.
They started out as a manufacturer,
Yeah.
then they moved into wholesale,
Right.
then they shifted to retail.
And now they're building this multi-brand portfolio.
Yeah, they've constantly evolved.
And they've been really good at strategic brand building. That Kong Linghui endorsement was brilliant.
Yeah, it really put them on the map.
And then they've been smart about acquiring other brands.
Yeah.
And they've shown the potential of a multi-brand strategy when it's executed well.
Yeah, they've managed to integrate these different brands without losing their own identity.
Right.
And I think their story is also a great example of navigating economic cycles.
Yeah, they've been through a lot of ups and downs.
But they've always come out stronger.
And they've done it by making tough decisions,
Yeah, like shifting away from the wholesale model.
Right.
Acquiring new brands.
And they've been successful at integrating those acquisitions.
Yeah.
Which is not easy to do.
No, it's not. And they've done it while also being shareholder friendly.
Right.
So they've been able to balance the needs of their investors with the needs of the business.
It's an impressive track record.
Yeah, it really is.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the question for the learner is, what can other businesses learn from Anta's story?
Yeah, I think that's a great question.
What are the core capabilities?
Yeah.
What are the strategic pivots
Yeah.
that are essential for success in today's rapidly evolving global landscape?
It's something to think about.
Yeah.
Anta's journey is really a testament to adaptability, strategic thinking, and a deep understanding of the market.
Absolutely.
And I think those are qualities that any business can benefit from.
For sure.
Well, thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
We've taken a dunk dive into the incredible story of Anta Sports.
From a small shoe factory in Xinjiang to a global powerhouse.
We've looked at the key moments that have shaped their journey,
The strategic decisions they've made,
the challenges they've overcome.
and the success they've achieved.
And we hope this has given you, the learner, a better understanding of Anta and the forces at play in the global sportswear industry.
Absolutely.
So, until next time,
Keep learning.
and keep diving deep.
See you later.
Bye.